Hi, and welcome again to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice. We're here in the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic today because my guest is Douglas Reeman. He's over from England visiting, and he's the author of 55 novels that have been published around the world. Welcome to Halifax.
Nice to be here.
You write books about men and ships and various times and places. I want to know about your very first experience on a boat. Can you remember the first time you were afloat?
Yes, I can, because funnily enough, I come from an army family. Everybody was in the army, way back, red coats, green coats, you name it. And then when I was 7 years old, I was sent to Singapore with the family, and I went on a troop ship. Now that doesn't sound very grand or anything, but imagine 7 years old, and this great ship going out of Southampton, all the way down, round the Cape, across, right up into Singapore. It was a great experience. And I was out there, I suppose, about 6 months, and when I came back, the first thing I said to my grandfather was, I want to be taken aboard the Victory down at Portsmouth, and that's how it already began. But that was the first experience, just a rotten old troop ship.
Wow, but a big, long journey. Now, are you one of those people that they say about the sea is in your blood, that kind of thing?
I don't think so. I used to be seasick a terrible lot when I went to sea, and when I first went to sea, which was a very, very old destroyer left over from the First World War, and people used to console me by saying, well, Nelson was seasick when he went to sea. It's no consolation, really.
Still feels pretty bad.
Yeah.
And it's a bit humiliating, isn't it?
Yes.
But you found yourself in the Royal Navy at 16 years old. What was that like when you put to sea in those days?
Well, it was overcrowded for a start, because most of the ships that I served in were very old, and so they were loaded up with new equipment, which needs, of course, a lot more men to man the equipment. So they were very crowded.
What was your job?
My job was keeping out of everybody's way. I was a midshipman, and I had to understudy all the other officers, mostly the navigating officer and things like that. The captain only ever spoke to me once, the whole time I was aboard, that particular ship. And he was all right, but he was a very strange chap. But it was mostly understudying the officers, the lieutenants and things. And then I left the destroyers after all the convoy work, and I went into motor torpedo boats, and that was much better, faster.
Now, back there when you're starting, did they still have this daily ration of rum that I always hear about in the Royal Navy? Yeah.
Oh yes, they had rations of rum until the 1970s, I think it was.
Wow.
But it was money, you see. It was the currency of the lower deck. Everything. You wanted the shirt cleaned, you'd give it to somebody who'd do it for you, and that's how they paid for it.
Amazing. Were you a writer way back then at 16?
Well, I did a bit, not much. I had a very good English master at school. That's all I can say, but not much. No. The first plunge into writing was. Well, I suppose it's like we all do. I was bragging a bit because I was listening to a radio and the chap was reading a book on it. And I was working on my boat at the time, my own boat, I mean, and I said to the chap, the carpenter who was working with me, I said, God, I could do better than that. And he said, well, why don't you? I said, no, I have no typewriter. I'll get you one, he said. And he got me this typewriter for £4, and I still got it. I've gone through 14 typewriters since then, but this one is the old sit-up and beg ones, you know, it takes 2 fists to press one key down.
Yes, that's right, real manual labor, isn't it?
I wouldn't get rid of it, but it's up in the loft sleeping now.
But you still write your novels on a manual typewriter?
Yes, I do, yeah.
You don't want all those extra electronic
I've got an electric typewriter, and that's as far as I go. I can't change now.
Draw the line there. Yeah, you spent some time in the Arctic as well. Which part of the Arctic was that?
Well, we were up and down between Scapa Flow and Iceland, and then Iceland we went from there to Murmansk and back again to Iceland.
Not necessarily an easy or pleasant kind of a journey.
It's the worst experience I've ever had, and not because of danger or anything like that. Escort duty is always dangerous, but it was just the bitter cold all the time.
That's right. When you were aboard ship, did you do much reading? I always think of men on ships having lots of time to sit in their bunks and read and escape from the unpleasantness.
I used to read Shakespearean plays, and I was in a ship once and it was sunk, and I told Penguin Books about this experience. They sent me a complete set of books to make up for it.
Wow.
But no, that's what I used to do. I wanted to be an actor at one time.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose I'm doing a bit of that now, really.
Here you are. You had extensive war experience in World War II. How did that shape your identity? It sounded like you saw a tremendous amount of action.
Well, I suppose it sticks with you. It certainly did with me. You don't talk about it much, I don't think. I remember it all. I remember it very well, very clearly.
How could you not talk about it? These are
It's a
very heavy
stupid.
experiences.
It's a stupid thing. You can write about it easily, but when people have all been through what you've been through, you just don't seem to talk about it. It's a pity in a way, but that's how it goes.
Now, you mentioned these motor torpedo boats
Oh,
that
yeah.
you're on. Could you describe what they look like? I'm not familiar with them.
Well, they range in size. The smaller ones are about 75 feet long, and they go up to 115 feet long. Each one carries 2 torpedoes. They have a speed of approximately 38 to 42 knots, and they usually have a ship's company of ranging from 14 to 30, according to their size. And they're just about the fastest thing on legs, you know, and they're used for attacking inshore convoys and things like that. For instance, we worked out of the southern ports of England, like Harwich and so on, and attacked the convoys up and down the German and Dutch coasts. And then we shifted to the Mediterranean, and we followed the 8th Army along, and then over into Italy for Sicily for the invasion. We sort of back up all the time.
Did you ever have one shot out from under you?
Well, yes, I did, yes. That was at Normandy.
Mm-hmm. And you ended up in the water.
No, I was on the land, actually. We got stuck. We were on a anti-tank gadget sticking out of the sea, and we didn't know it was there. And the tide was on the turn. We started to get off because we were under fire, and we got stuck on it. So I went ashore, onto the beach, that is, to try and kedge her off that way with an anchor, and the ship had a direct hit. And so there were only 4 of us left after that, but that was it. And guess who it was? Pulled me out of the water, a Canadian.
Good old Canadians. They're always around to help, especially with this cold water involved. Have you ever been accused of glorifying war in your books?
I expect so. If people do that, I will say I don't. I never. If people read my books, I never glorify war. I just say this is what it was like.
And so you do try to recreate those experiences of men in very critical situations, life and death situations. Why do you think that's so compelling for readers? You certainly have many fans worldwide.
I don't know. I think it's because they're always hankering after something which they've never shared and would like to know about it. And they go to the movies and see all these chaps doing these wonderful things, never getting a dirty shirt doing it and that sort of thing. But I think there's a great hankering for history too. For instance, if you're writing the 18th century books, 19th century books, you have to think differently when you're doing research, completely differently. You say to yourself, you mustn't say, what were they doing then on that day? You've got to say, what are they doing now? So when you pick up a copy of the Times, they dated 1812, you look at the advertisement, see where you can stable a horse on Cheapside and all this sort of thing. And that's just the stuff that people are interested in. They want to know how people lived, not just how they killed each other, but how they lived, how they worked. It's amazing. You get thousands of letters, of course, from people saying, oh, I lived there, and do you know if the house is still there, and this sort of thing. It's very interesting.
Do you know if you have it right, that you're being accurate when you're writing? Can you tell from the process, or do you wait to hear from the readers?
Oh, no, long before that. Usually in the middle of the night sometime. You must know that. Wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and think, he wouldn't have said that, or did I say that? Ooh. And so you start to worry then.
So there's this high degree of integrity and honesty that must exist within fiction.
Well, I think more so than anything else, because mostly it's the only way you can find out about what really happened. For instance, if you're doing research on a battle, a land battle, we'll say, and you'll read a general's report of it, and it'll say the 63rd Division advanced and did so-and-so and took such and such. But there's nothing about the bloke on the front of it, the chap from the PBI carrying his rifle and bayonet. You've got to get his point of view, and you do. Diaries, letters, all sorts of funny things. And people, you know, they're so generous. They want to give you these things. Like a lady gave me some letters just a few months ago, written by one of her ancestors. You know, they're priceless.
And do you work with that? Do you use that in some way for your next work?
Yeah, it's great help.
I always think of men on ships as being a very superstitious lot, whether we're talking about the 18th century or whether we're talking about contemporary times. Do you build any of that superstition into your stories?
Yes, I believe it. Sailors are just the same today. They're a very superstitious lot. They won't do things on certain days, and Oh, I'm just the same. Even now, right now I've left the sea, I'm very superstitious.
During the war, was that the case as well?
Yeah.
If you were
Oh, yes.
out on ship?
You had feelings about it, and you didn't. It's like you never mention a chap's name after he's been killed. It's a silly thing, but I mean, he's never mentioned again.
Where do you think that comes from in the whole history of sailing?
I think it comes from the old muster books, when only perhaps one or two of the warrant officers in the old sailing ship could read. And they used to read out the muster books because everything depended on that. Their watch and quarter bills, their pay, everything they did depended on that. And they just stopped reading the name, and eventually it just disappeared. I think that's where it comes from.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's some kind of spiritual dimension to that as well? I mean, there's a whole set of beliefs that must become stronger if you're out there in a ship in your life and death situation. You have to believe in something.
Yes, you've got to believe in something, that's true, but I'm not too sure about that. For instance, they always say that the spirits of dead sailors come back as seagulls. And when I see them flying around, I think, well, surely we could come back as something better than that, you know.
It was in 1957 that you wrote your first book, A Prayer for the Ship. And this was about World War II experiences. You took something of your autobiography and you reshaped it into fiction.
All of it, really, yes. It was about my sort of war. It was about motor torpedo boats. And it was very simply written. It was just one person's viewpoint. Nobody else thinks in the book at all. It's just the one person, because I was feeling my way, you know, and that's how it began.
Why did you lean toward fiction instead of telling your story?
Well, I don't think people have bought it. I think people like to read things they can share and understand about people, basically, which you don't get in a non-fiction report.
It was in the 1960s that you shifted to write the Alexander Kent novels.
Yeah.
So we move away from this century into the 18th century.
Yeah.
Why pick that time and place?
Well, it's always been my favorite time, and I told my American publisher this so many times, I think he must have got sick of it. And one day he said, well, what about having a go at it, you see? And we need a name for the character, and so I said Richard Belitho, because I knew a man called Richard Belitho. And it's quite a common name in Cornwall, of course, and a lot of big families of them, but that's how it all began. I've always liked it. So Reeman stayed, but Kent came up beside him, so we go alternately.
But does this become an alter ego, an alternate personality that you create for yourself?
Oh yes, we're quite different in every way.
Yeah, and I guess it gives you the freedom to try a different style.
Yes.
You know, a whole different kind of literature. Is it something that's so involving that you lose yourself in that time and place while you're writing?
Oh, absolutely, because you see, everything involved with the 18th, 19th century is, as far as sailors are concerned, is time and distance. And you've got to stick by that. When you're writing about something and you're taking a chap, say, to the West Indies or the East Indies, you've got to work out which route, what passage he's going to, what sort of stores he's got to carry, and everything about it. What sort of sails when they change from heavy duty canvas to light duty canvas, things like that. So you're with the ship and you get to know it, and you're one of them.
Okay. My guest today is Douglas Reeman. We're going to take a short break and be right back after this. Welcome back to Off the Page. We're here at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. My guest is Douglas Reeman. We're talking about his novels of World War II, but also of the 18th century. Could you take me back to being on board ship there, the Royal Navy? This is during the time of the wars between England and France, I guess. They were always going to war one time or another. What was it like for someone who's just low in the ranks, life aboard ship?
A lot would depend on what you were. For instance, the same ship, in my view, the same ship to a young midshipman who would be, say, 12 years old, joining his first ship, he might even be younger, it could be 11, joining his first ship, it might be a bit awesome, but his heart would be set on it. That's what he's wanted to do, or his family wants him to do. But somebody, poor wretch, who's been dragged through the streets by the press gang, just walking along, minding his own business, suddenly he's beaten over the head, dragged on board. It's quite a different viewpoint. And then, of course, there were the volunteers. strange enough, and they saw it as a way of making a living, a way of getting on in the service. Usually ended up, of course, as professionals, like sail makers and carpenters and riggers and things like that. But everybody would see it as a challenge, a different point of view.
I'm a bit mystified sometimes when I think about the idea of 12-year-old boys on ship. This doesn't seem like a great kind of a way to win a war with a bunch of kids out there. Or worse yet, how do you instill the loyalty in a man that if you've gone ashore and knocked him over the head with a 2x4 or something and said, "You're now in the Navy, here we go"?
Because after a while, as one of my captains says, your duty is to me, the ship, and His Majesty, in that order, and don't you forget it. And that was it. I think as soon as you were on board, you realized that the country and the cause wasn't important. The ship was all important, and your friends, your mates all around you, you depended on each other completely, utterly. And bear in mind that once the ship had left port, they was completely self-dependent. Anything broke, whereas today if something happens on board a warship and it needs splicing, they have to send and get a new one because people don't know how to splice wire anymore. And, but in those days, everything had to be, even boats. If a boat was broken, the boat had to be built. So they were completely self-dependent. I think that's the strength of it. So people became, well, very aware of the skills or otherwise of the people they were working under. And of course, it was the apprentice method, so that the man who was teaching you might be not very good. But as with the sailing master of a ship, for instance, he was the senior warrant officer and he was responsible for navigation. But he taught the midshipmen navigation, and every day they used to shoot the sun with their sextants and learn about that and how to write the log and all that sort of thing. So they eventually began to get the feel walking about the deck and with the officers, the lieutenants, and they got the feel of being a part of the ship.
Yeah, so it's a single unit in this tremendous amount of self-reliance and reliance on each other aboard ship. But what about the captain? I mean, certainly there were good captains and bad captains in those days. How much control did they have over that world?
Complete. He was God, and it all depended, of course, on whether he was a good one or a bad one, but his control was total. And it's quite extraordinary if you read some of the books, the log books of some of these old ships. You know, some captains were so ruthless. And then, of course, people say about poor old William Bligh of the Bounty. I'm a great champion of his. I won't hear all this rubbish about him, but people say, well, he had no sense of humour. That was his weak point. Now, he went to sea when he was 7 in the Navy, 7. So he wouldn't have a sense of humour, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, and a long career, I guess. Would you like to have been one of those sailors aboard a ship back then in that century?
I think I would, yes. I think I would, provided I was an officer, of course.
Okay. Now, you do the unthinkable in your fiction. You eventually kill off your protagonist. Did you have a rage of storming letter writers telling you that you shouldn't have done that?
I've had a lot of letters, yes, a lot of people upset about it. But this all started when the character was created, because the second book that came out, Form Line of Battle, I think it was called, and the publisher said, why don't we do a bookmark? So we did a bookmark, which was given away with each new book. And on the bookmark, it gives his whole life on it, when he was born, 1556, when he died, 1815. So I had to go through with it. And of course, it made him more real to me, more of a man. And now his nephew has taken over, so we're all right again.
So there are generations,
yeah.
Yes, the story is going to continue. Was there a sense of intense loyalty among the people aboard ship? I noticed that in your novel, this seems to be a very big issue.
Yes, because if you haven't got it, if you haven't got that loyalty, you can't trust people. And bear in mind that you could be walking the streets one week, and the next week you'd be sent aloft to work out on the sails. Not anything complicated, but you'd be sent aloft when you're probably terrified. So you had to learn to rely on people who knew what they were doing. Otherwise you just fall straight down and nobody ever stopped for anybody.
Which leads me to my next question, which is about compassion. It seems that, here in the time of men and ships and war and all this real macho stuff going on, that the issue of compassion is a very important one to you as a writer. Why is that?
Because it's there. It's there all the time. I've seen it myself, and people have had a bad time with inaction and so on, and you see the real friends come forward and try to put things right. Mm-hmm. And it stays with you. You don't forget. I mean, for instance, when I left the Navy, I was a bobby on the beat in London with the Metropolitan Police for a short while until I went back in the Navy for the Korean War. And it saw me very through a very difficult part. if you've got that feeling about helping your fellow human beings, it's not a bad thing.
What about the psychological aspects of your characters in the book? I mean, people on a ship out at sea, they're a kind of a microcosm, and certainly you have kind people and you have scoundrels and all that. Do you examine individual values that exist there?
Oh yes, I do, because when I first started writing, I said to my publisher, grand chap he was, but he's dead now, but I said, what's the most important thing to be a good writer, waiting for the gem to come out? And he said, oh, be a good listener. So that's what I do. I go around listening to everybody now.
Yes. If you could relive one day of your life, which one would you pick?
It would be a day in Toronto on the 6th of June, and I was giving a lecture, a talk, doing a coast-to-coast tour for my publishers on the 6th of June a few years ago, and somebody stood up in the audience and asked me a question which I couldn't answer, and I married her. She's sitting in the studio right here. That was the best day.
That was the day. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back to say goodbye to our guest right after this. Watching Off the Page today, and I've got a couple of questions left for our guest. I guess I'm just wondering about the politics of the 18th century that would send men off to war. I mean, some of them had a chance to do it and some of them did not. Was that the same or very different from your own experience there in World War II?
I'd say it's quite different, because we knew in the Second World War, we knew more or less what was going on, but in many of these in the 18th century, the county regiments, as they were called, they knew very little about anything, and they joined because it was a steady job, and it was usually the officers of the regiment were usually local dignitaries, and that's how it was.
Douglas, who were you reading that got you going on writing these kind of novels about men and ships?
I wasn't reading anybody. My favourite author was Neville Shute when I was in between jobs, as it were. He was a great author, I thought. And Montserrat, of course, I used to read him, people like that. I used to read the Hornblower books, of course, when I was younger, and but I didn't like those so much because, well, I suppose because he never went to sea and he didn't have the feel of it. That's my opinion.
And you're very sensitive to that. Authors who write about sailing and about ships that aren't accurate. It's very important to you that you're accurate.
It is very accurate. I recently asked to write an introduction to what was called the Mammoth Book of Sea Stories. I didn't have a chance to read them beforehand, otherwise I don't think I'd have written it. But anyway, some of the things in it were absolutely absurd. There's a chap, an American author, I think, who's writing about his time in the Royal Marines in 1770 or something. And of course the Royal Marines didn't exist in 1770, they were just the Marines. And that sort of thing. Another chap, another naval hero, in quotes, he's telling his men to pick up a 25-pound gun, 25-pounder gun, carry it, 6 men. 25-pounder gun, I think, weighs 3.5 tons. I mean, that's the sort of thing. It just makes me puke. And I think it's arrogance on the part of these authors. They talk down to the people who read them, who buy the books.
So you must have the respect for your reader that you feel you have to get it right.
I respect them more than anybody, and it's such a nice thing when you actually come face to face with them, which is pretty rare, of course, but it's very pleasant when you get the chance.
Douglas Reeman, I thank you very much for coming to Halifax and being on the show today.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching Off the Page. I'll see you again next time.